We are. Dean Batchelor, our Utilities Director, is unfortunately sick tonight and won't be able to attend, so I'll be handling the meeting on his behalf, but we're ready to start the show.
Great. So let's start with roll call. Do you guys want to start with you, please?
Commissioner Siegel present.
Commissioner Forcell present.
Commissioner Danaher present.
Commissioner Jackson present.
Commissioner Johnston present.
Commissioner Smith present.
And we also have Allison McCormick from the City Council.
Council Liaison Cormac present.
Thank you. Are there any oral communications from the public? I don't see any up here. Approval of the minutes. Were there any comments on the minutes from the?
Yes.
Please.
I wanted to amend or clarify that in the report, the comments about what I was saying, I said that the electricity usage was not easily readable. I meant it was not computer readable. And my suggestion is not that there would be a way to download it in computer readable format, as in like a CSV format versus just textual.
Change the word from easily to computer readable.
Correct. Thank you. That would be the only.
Any other proposed edits?
Sorry, is this on the first page, Commissioner comments?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Line 4 under reports from commissioner meetings. So is there a move to approve those minutes with that edit?
I so move.
Second? All in favor? Okay. Minutes are approved. Any comments on the agenda? All right. Any reports from commissioner meetings and events that people would like to make? Okay, good. Let's be very efficient tonight. General Manager of Utilities reports in Dean's absence. Jonathan, do you want to fill us in?
Thank you, Chair Danaher. We do have a few items to talk about here. So first off, I wanted to talk to you folks about about a hackathon that we co-sponsored with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. So our utilities team partnered with Bay Area clean energy providers, including Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Peninsula Clean Energy, and East Bay Clean Energy, and an early stage venture firm, Powerhouse, to co-sponsor a hackathon January 31st through February 1st, so last weekend. Over a 24-hour period, the Grid Shift Hackathon brought together teams of software developers, energy experts, and others to develop code to reduce or eliminate the carbon footprints in buildings. Over 120 participants registered, and 16 teams completed apps to compete for prizes. $16,000 in cash prizes were awarded to the 3 winning teams. The submissions, code, video, and photos are available online and can be sent out. Lena Perkins represented Palo Alto on the judging panel as she manages the program for emerging technologies, and you can reach her for further details at her city email. We are also, there are Nissan Leaf rebates for public power customers we want to make people aware of. So thanks to a partnership with the American Public Power Association, City of Palo Alto Utilities customers are eligible for special rebates on Nissan Leaf electric vehicles for a limited time. The rebates were originally available through the end of January, but now they're available through March 31st. This is a great opportunity to consider making the switch to an electric vehicle and also help support the city and utilities department's sustainability and climate action goals. And also, I think this is a big thanks to the public power community as well for negotiating these. It's good to be a part of the public power community.
Sorry, Jonathan, how big are the rebates? Do you know?
It's not listed here. You don't know off the top of your head, do you, Carla? Okay. We'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know how large they are. I remember them. I don't want to say anything wrong, so. Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that one.
If I may? Yeah, a lot of feedback. I recall sending these out to people, and I think it was 1,500 up to 3,500 is about the range that the rebates were. It depended on the model and a few other things, but that was the range I recall from the program if the program's just being extended.
Thank you. All right, the soft launch of the MyCPAU, the new online customer portal. We're starting a soft launch rollout for our new online utility account management service called MyCPAU. This is an improved customer website that will replace the existing online portal, which is called My Utilities Account. MyCPAU is going to offer a fast and secure way to pay your bill online and to set up automatic or recurring payments. MyCPAU, the customers will be able to view monthly usage, learn about opportunities to lower their utility bills, set notification preferences and alerts, and receive direct digital support from customer service staff. Commissioners have been invited to participate in the soft launch and help us beta test the new service. We're excited about this much-needed upgrade to our online utility customer services, and we would thank you all in advance for any feedback you can share. You'd visit cityofpaloalto.org/mycpau for more information. And with respect to the Nissan Leaf rebates, you can refer to cityofpaloalto.org/EV. The Great Race for Saving Water and the Earth Day Festival are coming up together. We're excited to announce that this year's Earth Day Festival and Great Race for Saving Water will be held on Saturday, April 25th at the Palo Alto Baylands Athletic Center. Join us for a day of fun with community partners for a 5K and 10K fun run and a walk plus kids dash. Following the race is an expo celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day, including live music, food trucks, an EV ride and drive, nature activities, raffle drawings, and more. Come join the fun while learning as we raise awareness, build education, and community engagement for climate action and protection of Earth's natural resources. To register and learn more, please visit cityofpaloalto.org/Earth Day. I also wanted to give the commission an update on the fiber RFP. So we're in the process of going through the review of proposals. We had 5 proposals. 3 of the proposers were interviewed, and we're in the process of doing background checks on all 3 firms. We'll be going to council next month to award the contract, and wanted to make sure that we acknowledged Commissioners Smith and Jackson for their help with the fiber, for helping the fiber team look at the firm's proposals and creating questions for the face-to-face interviews. So thank you for that. So that's everything for the general manager's report. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Any questions? Okay. Lauren and Don, I'll add my thanks. Really appreciate you making time for that. Let's see. Any commissioner comments tonight? No? Okay.
I just provide brief feedback on
Oh,
my
please.
CPAU. It is tremendously better. User-friendly. Feedback from my family has been great.
That's great. We're really pleased to hear that. Thank you for sharing that.
All right.
I'll chime in. I'm pretty sure you can download your usage data too on the new portal.
All right, good. All right, let's go on to new business. The first item is the recycled water strategic plan report. Carla, welcome.
I'd like to introduce Carla Daly for this item, our not only senior resource planner, but acting utility program services manager, a woman with many hats. So thank you, Carla.
Thanks. Good evening, Commissioners. I don't have a presentation, but I would like to say a couple of words about the report and then open up to questions. At some level, this recommended motion is a bit of a formality, asking for the Commission to recommend to Council acceptance of the report. There aren't any projects that are directly resulting with an approval by accepting this report. It's a list of projects, as you well know. But I just want to kind of speak a little bit to the importance of the work that was done via this report, both relating to decisions that have already happened and work that is still to come. First, looking back, I think that the decision that council ultimately made to enter an agreement with Valley Water and the city of Mountain View for the larger regional water reuse project really would have been difficult to make without the work that was done in this report. This really gave yourselves and council a full picture of what the options were, and I think that council was able to make that decision with the blinders off, and that was a really important part of what the purpose that this report served. Looking forward, it lays the groundwork for more work to come. Clearly, we realize that water decisions are made interdivisionally, interdepartmentally, and regionally with our partners around the Bay. That certainly happened in developing this report, and the decisions that we'll be making moving forward need to happen in the same way. This information and the projects that are identified in this report have been narrowed down a bit because of the decision that was made to send a large portion of the effluent to Valley Water under the agreement. But there are still many viable projects on the table, and those need to be rolled into a larger plan, a water integrated resources plan, that really we're moving toward the notion of this one water concept. It's kind of a buzzword in the industry right now, where we're looking at water from anywhere, any source, anyhow you can get it, and combining that into one portfolio. So not only the traditional water supplies and recycled water, but gray water and storm water and anywhere else we can get water. So this will be a really important piece of that. That's the next large project that we'll start working on. Again, it will be in collaboration with our friends in Public Works and with Valley Water and the cities around us at some level. And we will be coming back to you with more information on that. Whether we have that report completed in 2020 remains to be seen. The one water concept is a broad one. It will have a very large scope, but in any case, we'll be coming to you with intermediate results along the way anyway. So you can expect to see that in the future. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. I have my colleagues in Public Works in the audience behind me to answer anything that I can't answer, so please.
So really our role here is, if we think the report is not sufficient, not thoughtful, or it excludes things, it ought to be covered before it goes to council. So let's ask questions. AC?
So I do think the report is very good. I had a couple of questions. One is, I take it well, you talk about the salt removal facility. What would be the time frame for that? I mean, now that the contract is signed.
Samantha, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are ready to go out for RFP for the design work any day now, correct? And construction is anticipated to start early 2021? Completed by 2023? Yes. So that's the timeline.
Okay, that's helpful. And I take it that if the Valley Water exercises its option, then some of these options that are in Table 1 really should be just struck off. I mean, as I read the report in Table 3, you basically say that C1, C2, and C3 are not going to be viable practically.
If they exercise their option.
If they exercise their option.
Yes, that is correct. I would say that I'm comfortable with the report standing as it is because we don't know whether Valley Water will exercise their option or not, and we would want to rely on the work that's been done in this report to reconsider those other concept options should that be the direction that Valley Water goes. And I think there is very much a non-zero chance that Valley Water will not exercise its option.
When do they have to do that?
There are several milestones. They have more or less 10 years to decide whether or not they want to exercise the option, but even at that point, they can start paying us $1 million a year without physically taking the water for another 10 years. Is that right? And then after that time, they do not have any rights to it anymore.
So it could be, wasn't sure, 10 years or 20 years before we would know whether some of these options might be viable.
It could be, and at that point, we'd probably want to refresh the report if it were 20 years from now. But in any case, the information that we've gathered is still worth something, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess it's a related question, but I noticed in your ranking in Table 2, you had ranked C1 as your number 2. Does it make sense for us in your report? Does it make sense to plan worst-case scenario? Or is that just another way of looking at the data, looking at the evaluation? So worst-case scenario being that Valley Water does accept the effluent, does agree to exercise their option, and C1 goes away. So now our decisions, our rankings are now A1 and A2, not A2 and C1. If I'm reading this correctly.
That's correct. I mean, there can be, when we are considering these concept options in our One Water report, we will eliminate the options that are not consistent with the Valley Water transfer and assume that those are off the table for our next round of evaluations.
Okay, and just one follow-up question on that. Just to confirm, A1, A2, A3 are unaffected by the new plant and the effluent selling?
That's correct. We can still, I want to make sure A1 NPR Phase 3 is still on the table. What were the other ones that you listed off? A2 and A3.
A2 and A3.
Oh, A2 and A3.
Yeah. Essentially,
yes, all of
piping water to
those are
South Palo Alto.
all of those are still viable.
Okay. Okay. Is there any reason, is there any reason why we wouldn't do this?
Wouldn't do
option A1, A2, or A3? Money aside, let's assume money aside, right? Obviously, money is a significant portion, and they're not small dollars, but is there any reason why we would not do that?
If money were no object, I would think we would be happy to build it.
Okay.
But yeah, reality is that money's
always an
a
option. Sure.
large object.
Thank you.
So I had one kind of, is that okay? Sorry, follow-up on that, which is there any way, like, starting tomorrow, anytime there's any project in at least the A1 South Palo Alto area, where if there's digging going on, that we can put in these pipes at that time? That's just known to all the different service groups.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's kind of two levels to that. One is the smaller pipes that would need to go to serve the customers off a trunk line, and those would be a little less expensive to put in, but we haven't, because council hasn't moved to put this non-potable pipeline in the plan, we haven't declared a recycled water use area, and so some of the building code triggers don't go into effect. Putting the trunk line in the ground now without council approval would still be quite expensive, even with the streets open. this would not be a negligible cost to put pipeline in the ground. So I think council would really need to be a little more certain that this is the direction they would want to go. Do you want to add something?
And I think in those situations, you still end up needing to trench. So there's still a large additional cost. You're saving the cost of mobilizing the construction firm out to the site, but you're still incorporating a large majority of the costs associated with putting in those trunk lines regardless. And so I think that informs why we've not moved forward with something without council approval.
Other comments, questions? Allison, please.
If you're all done, I'll just add that I believe in the Cubberley draft concept plan, there is some discussion about the potential of using recycled water there. They're also looking very much at just using the water that's available there. So I know that was one of the open questions is, would the purple pipes be there in order for them to use it? So that's one that would, be related to A1, certainly.
So last year we had a discussion, the staff actually brought up the idea, how much insurance would we buy to make sure we had enough water to keep our gardens alive? And there was a lot of interest in that. I think that thinking ought to go into what are our requirements on that, and that insurance concept. Population would pay a lot to maintain our canopy and our gardens. I thought the report was well done, a little confusing for me. We have a ranking of reports, ranking of options, some of which aren't options, or won't become options at best for 10 or 20 years. So I would maybe combine tables 1 and 3, or redo table 3, maybe combine them and just put them in order of what the options are, and put the C1, 2, 3 at the bottom as potential future options, so people can see that. When do we, or where and how do we do analysis of what our needs are, and how much would we have to preserve to have that incremental value to protect our canopies and gardens? As I'm sure you've calculated that, it doesn't really appear here. So these are options, but they don't really match up relative to our needs, or they aren't presented relative to our needs.
So there's kind of two different ways to look at our needs, and this report and the decision around our overall water portfolio overlaps with what we would do in a drought. And so that will be, drought resilience will be one of the attributes that we incorporate into the one water evaluation of what our full supply portfolio recommendation is. So that'll be one of the factors that's considered. Does that answer your question?
All right. So the other way of saying, we recognize this is only part of the picture.
Oh, absolutely.
It's
It's a small part of the picture.
Yeah.
Yes.
One other suggestion you might consider, not a requirement at all, is adding a column for years to complete, if people wanted to undertake any of these. But those are just suggestions on redoing the table and adding years to complete, and I'll leave that to staff's discretion. Are there other comments or questions or discussion? Then we're requested recommending to the council accept the report, subject to any edits the staff chooses to make. Is there a motion to approve that?
I'll move that we recommend the council accept the report.
Seconds?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? All right, great. So we're ahead of schedule. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you, Carla. That means we still have some strength to consider a more complicated topic, which is the discussion of the carbon neutral plan and buckets 1 and 2 and 3 and the rest. James Stack, welcome, and take it away.
So I'd like to introduce the item. So over the last year, we've had a number of discussions on using hourly accounting for evaluating the carbon content of our electric supply portfolio. And tonight, we're bringing you a proposal that memorializes that policy. And it's a complex topic. We've done our best to boil it down into some digestible chunks. I wanted to thank those who commented on the proposal in the last couple of days, and I think it's revealed possibly, we'll see how the UAC feels about it, but possibly a need for a little more discussion before taking action. I would think of this item as having two primary components. First, choosing whether or not to act tonight to amend the carbon neutral plan to move to hourly accounting. That's maybe topic 1 in this item. And topic 2 was intended to be a Q&A session about a concept we talked about last year about exchanging California renewables for out-of-state renewables and using the funds to generate funding for a variety of carbon-reducing activities. We'd recommend first focusing on the first component and maybe putting the second topic aside for now, and possibly picking it up if the first discussion gets resolved tonight. We're going to pause partway through our presentation and let the UAC have discussion on that first topic rather than heading in to the second topic and complicating the discussion.
A little bit more prefatory, we had some calls this evening. One policy issue is selling off renewables in excess of what we need. City has not done that as much in the past as it could, and I think there's a general consensus that we have excess resources, we ought to sell them off and capture that economic benefit. So part of what we're discussing tonight is what is excess? And if we have a shortfall in our carbon accounting, do we meet it with expensive, with a more costly or less costly approach, and the pros and cons of that? So, James?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Danaher. That's a helpful context. I'm Jim Stack. Good evening, commissioners and council member. I will jump in. This is the latest in a series of discussions we've had over the past year or two, going back to our integrated resource plan development process about carbon accounting for our electric supply portfolio and how we meet our RPS compliance requirements. So the presentation and report we put together originally had kind of two components. As Jonathan mentioned, we'll kind of focus, I think, mostly on the proposed changes to the carbon neutral plan. That's kind of the first part. The second part is a little bit more nuanced about the way we satisfy our RPS requirements and exactly how much of our supplies we should sell. So we might kind of pause halfway through, as Jonathan said, and see where we are. So I'll jump into the carbon neutral plan proposal update first. So the change that we are proposing to make to the plan, which is shown in red line in the report, there are two major changes, along with some additional cleanup. The original plan hasn't been amended since it was adopted in 2013, so there's a little bit of cleanup involved. But the major changes are, number one, to switch from an annual carbon accounting approach that we currently use to one that's based on an hourly approach, where we look at the hourly average emissions factors of the grid and the difference between our load and our supplies on that more granular hourly basis. And the second proposal is to permit the use of RPS-eligible unbundled RECs, also known as Bucket 3 RECs, which are usually from out-of-state resources, to neutralize any of the residual emissions that would result from this change to the carbon accounting methodology. And the reason for the need to use RECs is essentially when we switch from annual accounting to hourly accounting, our supply portfolio looks a little bit dirtier because right now there are, even in a year where we have on an annual basis our supplies matching our load, if you look at it hour by hour, there's almost always a mismatch. And the periods where we have a surplus of supplies compared to our load tend to be when the grid is cleaner overall, when there's a lot of solar power on the grid. And the periods, conversely, when we have a deficit, we need to buy power from the grid, tend to be the dirtier periods, like at night or in the afternoon in the summer. So when you weight our different long and short positions by the intensity of the emissions intensity of the grid at those periods of time, the result is we look like we have some emissions associated with our portfolio, these residual emissions that we have to clean up somehow. And we're proposing to use bucket 3 RECs to do that. The cost impact is relatively small. In the report, we cited a number of $60,000 per year to neutralize those emissions. Looking today, bucket 3 REC prices have gone up over the past couple of months, so it's probably more in the $150,000 per year range. So still relatively small, but not insignificant. And the motivation for these changes that we're proposing essentially is that the grid has changed dramatically over the past 7 years. As we all know, there's vastly more solar on the grid, and as a result, we have the duck curve issue, and the emissions intensity of the grid electricity can vary dramatically from hour to hour and from season to season now. And as I said earlier, the periods where we have a surplus of energy compared to our load tend to align with the periods where the grid is cleaner. And conversely, we have deficits during the periods when the grid is dirtier. And as you guys all know, because of the way of the grid has evolved, people have started to raise questions about whether we can credibly and accurately claim to be a carbon neutral utility on the basis of a simple annual accounting approach. And I should mention that there are other organizations and regulators out there who are starting to look at this issue as well. And so we see, and folks are reporting on their annual emissions accounting. So we see that this is the direction that things are headed in. And so while there's no urgency to adopt this approach right now, we think that by shifting to an hourly accounting framework, we'll be able to get out ahead of this and provide some additional credibility to our carbon neutral utility claim. So over the past couple of weeks, we've had a chance to speak with some community members and a couple of environmental organizations about our proposal. We're starting to recognize that it may not be as straightforward as we had thought. And that there may be some additional community engagement that's needed before we take this and make this a change formally. So we'd like to get your guidance on that. And as we see it, we think there are basically 4 different possible paths that we could take with the motion tonight. So we can kind of separate it into 2 different decision points. The first decision point is whether to adopt an hourly accounting framework or stick with our annual approach. So the first 2 options shown up here are if we adopt the hourly accounting framework. If we do that, then the second decision point is whether to use bucket 3 RECs to neutralize residual emissions. Under the first proposal here, the first alternative here, we would not use any bucket 3 RECs at all. And if we took that approach, we would have to maintain a certain amount of surplus supplies in order to avoid having to purchase unbundled RECs. So we would, right now we have about a 10% surplus, and we would keep about 4 to 5% of that in order to avoid having to buy bucket 3 RECs. So we would save some money, about $1.7 million per year on average over the next 10 years, but not as much as if we sold all the way down to our load and then used a small amount of bucket 3 RECs to neutralize those residual emissions. So the second option below is if we do allow unbundled RECs to be purchased, and we save about an additional $500,000 to $600,000 per year using that approach, and that's the approach that we're recommending in the staff proposal. If we go down that route, there's an additional discussion we could have about selling even further and having an even greater reliance on bucket 3 RECs. And we can talk about that at a future point. However, if we choose to maintain an annual accounting approach, That's option 3 and 4 shown here. If we keep the annual accounting approach, we see no reason for us to maintain any of our surplus supplies. So we could sell all of that 10% excess we have right now, and there would be no need to purchase any unbundled RECs. So it would be a simpler approach. Again, we would have the issue of the questions about our credibility in claiming carbon neutrality. But that would be the simplest approach, and it would yield the greatest savings, about $2.4 million per year.
So Jim, let me interrupt to try to rephrase things, make sure I have the concept accurate, and maybe that'll help with understanding, or maybe I have a misunderstanding. When we talk about savings, here we're really talking about earnings, right? From selling the surplus RECs we have?
Right, yep.
Okay, so if we sell all the surplus we have, that would be a net $2.4 million a year under the current accounting. If we sell it under the hourly accounting, because there's a cost that comes with that of about, I think explained to be $600,000 or $700,000 a year, potentially. It would be the equivalent of that much RECs.
Yeah, if we don't sell the full 10%, if we keep about half of that.
Right. So we can earn $2.4 million. We have a cost of $700,000 if we offset the hourly accounting with our bucket 1 RECs. And the cost of the hourly accounting is $100,000 if we do the offset with the bucket 3 RECs and sell our more valuable bucket 1 RECs. So I just want to make the point that savings is a little confusing, because it's when we're earning more and then we've got some costs, and are the costs higher or low? So
That's right, yep.
yeah, please continue.
Okay. The fourth option here is kind of similar to option 3. It's, again, business as usual, keeping the annual accounting approach, but with a plan to come back later to reconsider this in a year or longer. So we would save the $2.4 million per year initially, but then we could revisit this discussion later. And under that proposal, again, we would sell the 10% excess down to our load for the next year. And we could begin to report on our emissions total under the hourly accounting framework. Every year we put out an annual report on our carbon neutral plan and our RPS compliance. So we could report in that report what our accounting total would be, our carbon total would be under the hourly accounting approach, but we wouldn't purchase anything to neutralize any emissions that result from that approach. So there would be no cost associated with that. It would just be an informational report. And the third sub-bullet here is we could begin to think about using this hourly accounting framework for evaluating different supply and demand resources on equal footing. So use it kind of for more operational, internal purposes.
Can you expand on what that means, evaluating supply and demand resources? In what context does the utility do that?
So right now, we evaluate whether it makes sense to pay people to use less, our efficiency programs. We evaluate that activity as an alternative to buying new supplies. And
Demand response programs.
well, no, I mean actually energy efficiency,
okay.
more efficient appliances,
Okay.
home.
Gotcha.
Dealing with the building envelopes for homes and businesses. And we have ways of comparing the cost of those efficiency programs against the cost of buying new electric supply. And if it's more cost effective to pay people to put in lower LED lighting, we want to do that before we go out and buy more electricity. The same concept may also apply to carbon. There may be ways to take this hourly accounting framework and look at demand side measures like energy efficiency, electrification measures, and supply resources, and be able to evaluate the dollars per ton carbon savings of all of those measures on equal footing using this hourly accounting methodology. It's something that's going to require some additional development, but there's some interesting thinking going on in other utilities like SMUD about how to do this sort of thing. So this
so
would be
let
a
me
concept we
jump
develop a
in
little
and-
bit
yeah.
over the next year. I think regardless of what we do here, but that would be an activity. I think the point here is that we're trying to the point here we're trying to get across is that deferring action tonight would not mean that it would not stop us from continuing to explore the use of hourly accounting in daily operations.
Put another way, the department would pursue the hourly accounting analytics, whether or not we incorporated hourly accounting as part of the carbon neutral policy.
I was just wondering where those analytics actually come into play in terms of things that happen.
I mean, a simple example is that a supply resource with a load that generates a lot in the summer hours, like solar, would, under the hourly accounting methodology, have a lower carbon impact than one that generates the same amount of energy but in off-season periods. And when you translate those two supply resources into dollars per ton, you may find that they actually compare reasonably favorably, even if the solar is cheaper than the other resource. So that's an example of how you apply it to two supply resources. You can also start getting demand resources and efficiency programs into the mix as well.
And do we currently evaluate supply resources in terms of dollars per ton of carbon? Is that already part of our framework for deciding whether to sign a contract for solar or wind or landfill gas or something?
Not really. All the resources we're evaluating on the supply side are carbon neutral, so we kind of look at them as being equivalent. We haven't looked at their hourly generation profile from a carbon perspective. We do look at the hourly generation profile from a dollar, a value perspective in terms of the value of the energy it produces. So.
So would this enable us to move in a direction of looking at what grid emissions are avoided by bringing new supply resources online?
Yes, that's right. That's the idea. Okay. So we have a series of slides after this one about different RPS compliance strategy options and the renewable exchange proposal, but I think this would be a good place to pause and talk a little more about the hourly accounting proposal first.
Yeah, absolutely. So questions, comments on the parts to date?
I have a question. I really am trying to respect the separation, but given these choices here, does choosing one of these things affect our ability to choose something in the later part of the conversation, the next topic? So, okay, let me try to be more concrete. Again, you have this other chart, cost savings on this RPS thing, and there's three options over here. Okay, if we wanted to take, just an example, we're not there yet, the one with the most revenue, is picking one of these things a requirement for being able to choose that? Do you understand the question?
Yes, yeah. I think you could make that choice without switching to the hourly accounting approach.
So you have the carbon neutral plan, right? That's a whole separate discussion.
Yes. Yeah, if we wanted to choose that option, we would have to amend the carbon neutral plan too, in order to maintain a carbon neutral approach.
So are you saying that we need to do one or two if we want to go implement one of those other things later on in the next conversation?
No, I think you could maintain the annual accounting under the carbon neutral plan, but you'd have to amend the plan in terms of the ability to use more of those bucket 3 recs.
There truly are two different discussions.
Right, yep.
Okay, sorry.
each slide here presents the alternatives a little bit differently than they're presented in the report. I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. Your point number, option number 1 corresponds to option A in the report.
Yes, that's correct.
And number 2 corresponds to option B in the report.
Correct.
And option C in the report is off the table now. Is that right?
That's correct.
I understand we might want to come back
Yeah,
to that.
the 3 options presented in the report all assume that we switch to an hourly accounting approach.
I get that, but 1 and 2 are A and B in the
Yeah,
report. Okay.
and option C in the report is kind of shown as 2A here on this slide. The future discussion, future consideration of additional swapping.
All right, thanks, that's helpful.
The conversation has taken a very interesting turn, and I appreciate that we're not letting go of facing all the complexity head on. I do want to return to, at least from where I sit, sort of my initial interest in annual versus hourly accounting came from a place of you manage what you measure, and I think there was a sense that we were giving ourselves a big pat on the back for being carbon neutral, but that annual accounting was sort of letting us trade lots of summer solar that the grid no longer really needed for winter fossil fuel generation, and it came from a desire to sort of be more honest and transparent about the carbon emissions. And so I have an instinct to want to use hourly accounting because I feel like it's a more accurate reflection. And along the way, we ended up in a big discussion of RECs in bucket 1 and bucket 3, and I know we had several sessions working through that, and I emailed offline with Jim, because there's this pervasive what's the right word? Not understanding, but perception that bucket 3 RECs are dirty power masquerading as clean, and we don't trust them, and if they actually sort of had carbon removing additionality, they wouldn't be so inexpensive. But I think that staff managed to convince us that there's actually an arbitrage opportunity, that they are sort of legit as RECs, and then it feels like we're not doing our fiscal responsibility if we don't maximize our use of bucket 3 RECs. But setting that aside, I think what's actually important is what we were just starting to get at, which is where the city makes the biggest difference on in terms of carbon footprint is in the long-term contracts that we sign, procuring renewable, or I'm going to say carbon-free energy. And so I'm inclined to like any system that incentivizes us to do the right thing by the California grid, which includes all the dispatchable hydro that we have, because we if I understand our dispatching profile, given that we do economic dispatch, but it's economic when the grid is dirtiest, so yay. I'm concerned that we seem to have, we've taken on more and more and more solar at a time when it's not clear that that's the most helpful thing to the grid. And I would love to see a policy that somehow got us in a direction of more wind contracts, landfill gas, assuming that's dispatchable, geothermal, baseload type resources. So for me, if that's 1 or 2 or 4. What I'm really interested in is 4C, I think, which is less about what we put on our power content label and more about how we do our supply contracts, as well as efficiency programs, et cetera. So yeah, I think that I feel like I should be ending by saying, and therefore I support, but this, you know, any of them is fine that takes us in a direction of really drilling down on 4C, and the place where I feel like the utility has the most solid impact. I'll leave it at that.
I guess I would second what Lisa just said. And then going back, I think you said something, Jim, about hourly accounting leaving the impression of a less clean utility or portfolio or something like that as an impression to ratepayers. And I guess what worries me, and I don't know where it comes out in terms of actual practice, but I think in disclosure, I think it is important to provide the hourly accounting information, because I do think people are misguided. And people may make different decisions if they know that they have an impact. And I think, you know, my very unscientific polling suggests people don't really appreciate that in Palo Alto, because they think Palo Alto is whatever, green, carbon neutral, carbon free, whatever words they choose. And I think there is a misperception there that we should clean up regardless of which we choose in terms of practice, whether it's the bucket 3 recs or not. I think that's really important, and it starts with making that accounting public, and I think probably a pretty big information effort in the community. I know I personally, you know, was surprised to learn that as well.
Jim, I want to get to the rest of your presentation, but we did have some thoughtful memos sent to us from Citizens for a Carbon-Free Palo Alto. Are either of you, Brett or what is it, Bruce? Thank you for sending that. Now, we don't have any cards up here about requests for citizen, you know. Yeah, but if you'd like to address us, this would be a good time for the discussion. Please.
Yeah, Brett Anderson, Carbon Free Palo Alto. So Bruce and I work closely together on all these things. So the second memo that we sent really, we hoped, clarified some things. It's a very complicated topic, and we also were confused a bit by the presentation versus the report and numbering and thing. But I think we're closest to number 1 here in trying to separate the decision about using hourly accounting to drive our decisions about supply purchases and demand management. That is the important thing that will actually reduce our local greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing is to respect the bright line and the red line, which was the hard work of putting in place our current definition of carbon neutrality, which is directly contracted renewable power in California, which is different from bucket 3 recs. So maybe that's bucket 1, and you call bucket 3 the ones that are more, say, unbundled and available to basically neutralize anybody's electricity anywhere. So we think that the community and the broader community may not be tuned into this or care too much about this, but there is a segment of Palo Alto that likes, that does pride itself on maintaining standards of the highest level in terms of the green action that we take. And I think that is a real action, is to decide that we're going to go 100% renewable contracts and cover our needs. And we've been doing that up until now, and hopefully we'll continue doing that. I think if you open that discussion to link hourly accounting with using bucket 3 recs. I mean, if a bucket 3 rec is the same as a bucket 1 rec, and we can convince ourselves of that, then there's a lot of money on the table, either to just stick in our pockets or use locally to do further decarbonization. And if we can strike that bargain, it's a very different conversation, I think, than saying we're going to use an accounting method that's more accurate and gets us more effective programs for supply and demand. So that's kind of where we come out on this. So when we saw the proposal, we really like the idea of hourly accounting, and we like the idea of a carbon price. We like, our throw-in proposal here was to set a social cost of carbon for internal calculations of deciding what we do for efficiency programs or for supply contracts. It's been adopted in the utilities for Washington. They basically agreed, and now on their estimate of $74 per ton. So that's accepted by the utilities there. So we can move that direction. I think those are great directions to go because they make us more effective and more honest about how much carbon is really costing us as a community. So I think for the rest of it, it doesn't really. I think there's more discussion. We would appreciate more discussion with the community about moving toward using bucket 3 to arbitrage if there is an arbitrage opportunity. Arbitrage kind of assumes there's equivalence between the two things. But for now, to move as soon as possible to an hourly accounting, I think is great. I mean, just like we would have hourly pricing for customers eventually, where I would have an incentive myself to heat my water at 8 p.m. rather than 6 p.m.
Smart meters are coming eventually.
So those kind of things I think are really solid steps forward, and that's kind of our perspective in carbon-free Palo Alto. But crossing over to using, wouldn't want to cross over lightly into using bucket 3 recs to compensate for our load, whether that's calculated on an annual or an hourly basis. But if we decide to do that, then let's do a deal where it makes a difference, and it's not just saving cost, but sacrificing real value in terms of the quality of our green energy. So.
Brett, thank you very much. If you want to ask questions, Brett,
I sort of do, but I sort of think that's going to get us down to the conversation we're going to have next. So I'm going to.
Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Jim, let me ask a question this way. I'm still trying to grapple with all this. So we have, assume, 2.4 million worth that we could capture by selling our excess. Let's assume that 2.4 is there and we're going to take it. Now, if we go to the hourly accounting, we have a gap of 700,000 we have to cover one way or another. We either take it out of the earnings we'd have from selling the excess, or we buy bucket 3 recs for $100,000. Now, under that approach, as compared to the status quo being annual accounting, $2.4 million of sales versus hourly accounting, $2.4 million of sales, and you buy 100,000 worth of recs. In my mind, we've come out ahead, apart from having the better analytics. At least environmentally, all we've done in that case is to buy bucket 3 recs, which has some benefit, maybe not that much. But I appreciate Brett's point that it may be a slippery slope. Whether these are savings or not, it depends on how you use the words. But let's go on with your presentation. Oh, please.
I did want to, so there's a lot of interest from other commissioners about 4C, but it doesn't seem to be, so let me ask the question. 4C is not precluded in 1 or 2, is it?
No, 4C is not a policy.
I understand, it's a thing you could do. And alternatives 1 and 2 are, let's go hourly, big time, right?
That's
and
right.
C is, and 4C is like, Well, independent of that, we could think about hourly in some other ways behind the curtains.
Right.
So there's nothing, we could do 1 or 2 and do C whenever we want, right?
Correct, yeah.
Put another way, we'll start C right away. Staff's already doing it, and then do we incorporate the hourly into our policy and to our sales and purchases?
Well, I just want to say, for the reasons that Lauren and Lisa have mentioned and the speaker mentioned, I strongly think that the hourly accounting makes sense. It's going to give us a more accurate picture of really what our carbon situation is with the energy portfolio.
All right, but if you're on the finance committee, switching to that means you have $700,000 less of RECs to sell, or if you offset, if you buy bucket 3, you have $100,000 less. I'm not disagreeing with hourly accounting,
Right.
but I just
I
want to...
understand that's the next discussion.
Yeah.
Well, it's confusing whether it's the next discussion or not, but it seems to me that, am I reading it incorrectly, that at option 2, we are basically down $100,000 in savings, and we are now at hourly accounting?
That's right, yeah.
That doesn't seem like a high expense. So what we've gone to hourly, it's costing us $100,000. Okay.
Yep.
And to Brett's point, we're in that slippery slope. So that's the issue for us. I think we understand the issue now. Jim, do you want to continue with your, thanks for indulging our questions.
Sure, yeah. I think the next several slides will hopefully shed some more light on the decision about how much of our surplus to sell and whether to purchase any bucket 3 RECs or not. So part 2 on RPS compliance strategy options. This is our famous graph showing the long-term trend in our renewable procurement over the years, starting with just a little bit of old hydro projects in 2003, then adding wind and landfill gas, and more recently, lots of solar. And this shows how we're projected to stay compliant with our RPS requirements through basically the next couple of decades. So these are the 3 approaches that are outlined in the staff report. So option number 1 is where we sell some of our surplus, but we retain about 4 or 5% of that. And so we have less savings, $1.7 million per year of savings. Option number 2 is where we sell all of our surplus and purchase a small amount of bucket 3 RECs. So we have a little bit more savings, about $2.3 million in savings. And then option 3 is the going the furthest, the renewable exchange idea, where we sell all of our surplus and then we swap some of our other resources even below our load, some of those in-state renewables, and swap them in favor of out-of-state renewables, the unbundled RECs. So those are the 3 options that I'll be showing here. So this table summarizes the savings, which we've been discussing already. So compared to the current portfolio, option number 1 saves $1.7 million, option number 2 saves 2.3, and option number 3 saves 3.3. The downside is that your RPS level decreases to 50%, then 45%, then 39%, and your hourly emissions, your emissions under an hourly accounting approach remain 0 for all of those, assuming that you're purchasing some unbundled RECs. Interestingly, under the state's power content label regulations, all these approaches will look essentially basically the same. The third approach will have a slightly higher emissions total. All of them, unfortunately, will show us having some positive emissions, even under our current portfolio. We learned recently that the state's portfolio, the power content label regulations proposal essentially ignores all of our surplus supplies compared to our sales. It also assigns an emissions intensity to landfill gas, which we most accounting standards assign a standard of emissions of 0.
So next time we see this chart, instead of saying supply cost savings, just call it net surplus sales.
Okay.
I think that'll be less confusing. Right?
Got it. So this is how our power content label looks currently on the left. The one in the middle shows if we sell all of our surplus down to our load, and then the one on the right shows the power content label if we do the most aggressive approach with the renewable exchange approach. And under that one, we would have a section that looks like it's coming from unspecified sources, which again creates sort of a communications issue with customers who are unsure how clean our electricity supply is. This graph.
Go back to that slide for a second here. And go back one more slide. I'm going to ask you to compare columns, items 1 and 2 on that. Cell load remain, the 1.7 net sales versus the 2.4 or 2.3 net sales. Compare that to the, back to the pie chart slide. Is that apparent in, how are those reflected in these slides?
So options 1 and 2 here, they would have the same power content label basically, because under option 1 we have a little bit of surplus relative to our load, which we can't show on the power content label.
All right, so the power content label, another way of saying, is on an annual accounting basis.
Right.
Okay.
And just to clarify, in column 1 on page 11, the previous slide with the table, when it says and remain carbon neutral, that means by the California power content labeling rules, because column 2 is also intended to be carbon neutral by Palo Alto's standard when we say cell supply is greater than load.
So column 1 means it's equivalent to hourly accounting, carbon neutral under an hourly accounting framework, but not allowing bucket 3 RECs. So we have to maintain some of our surplus supplies in order to avoid having to purchase unbundled RECs to deal with residual emissions. And option number 2 here is where we allow unbundled RECs. So we can sell all of our surplus and then purchase those $60,000 or $100,000 worth of unbundled RECs to neutralize the residual emissions.
Right, so what I'm reacting to is the parenthetical and remain carbon neutral, which does not appear in column number 2, but it is our intention to remain carbon neutral by our own definition.
Right, yeah, that's a little
bit. And we're tweaking our definition of what it means to remain carbon neutral in column number 2.
Yeah, that's a little bit confusing. Yeah, it should probably say remain carbon neutral without purchasing unbundled RECs. And column 2 should say remain carbon neutral, but rely on unbundled RECs to neutralize residual emissions.
And the reason we're teasing those two apart is because I was under the impression it was because of something having to do with the way the state of California or the Energy Commission or somebody defines, no.
No.
Okay, it's just it's bucket 3 RECs versus not.
Right, yep. That's right.
The main difference is the amount of net surplus sales, the amount of earnings from net surplus sales.
So this first graph here shows the net surplus sales over the next 10 or 11 years. The green line is the most aggressive, selling the most, selling even more, even below our load level, and swapping those for unbundled RECs. The purple line is where we sell the 10% surplus, and the red dotted line is where we sell just about 5% of the surplus.
If you were to integrate under each 3 of those curves, what would the total number be for each one?
I have the total savings amounts. Let's see. So for the most aggressive, it's about $37 million. That's option, the green line. The purple line, selling down to load, is about 25 million, and the red dotted line is about 18 million total.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just a comment while we're on that. I do think it's important to put large numbers of millions of dollars in the context of the retail rate impact. Back to the table. On page 11, we're looking at a 2% rate savings.
Yeah.
And help us remember, rate increases over the last few years have been 9%, 5%, 8%. I'm making these numbers up, but I'm trying to hit the approximate size of the percentage
have been pretty
of retail
significant,
rate increases the last few years.
Ranging from 4 to 9% over the 4 to 5 year period. That was after, I'll just reiterate, that was after a 7-year period with no rate increases.
Fair point.
A rule of thumb we use is that a $1.2 million increase is roughly a 1% increase in rates. 1.2 million per year. So a 1 year 1.2 million doesn't result in a major rate increase, but an increase in annual costs equal to 1.2 million is about a 1% rate increase. And vice versa, a savings related of 1.2 million would be a 1% rate decrease, or an avoidance. 1% in rate increase is avoided in the future.
The next slide charts the RPS level of the different strategies over time. I'm also showing the current portfolio where there's no sales. We have an excess of supplies. That's the black line, where we maintain an RPS level a little over 60% most years. Selling our surplus drops us down to the red line or the purple line or the green line. The green line is also coincident with our RPS requirement. So this assumes that we sell all of our excess down to the RPS level and purchase unbundled RECs for everything above that. The next graph shows the emissions intensity that we would have to report on our power content label. It's for most of these strategies, it's approximately the same. It's a very small number, a positive number, but a small number. And compared to the grid average, which is about 528 pounds per megawatt hour, all these strategies would look much cleaner than that. Even the renewable exchange strategy, where we sell the most supplies, and we don't get credit for the carbon impact of the unbundled RECs that we would purchase on the power content label. It still looks relatively clean. And then we have some next steps. Obviously taking these issues to City Council for approval, seeking some additional feedback on these ideas from the community. So we're ready for questions.
I have a couple of questions. One is, okay, on all these various net surplus sales graphs, let's just take the biggest one with the renewable exchange strategy with over time, $37 million. What can we do with that money?
So it struck me listening to the discussion that there might be a missing piece to our proposal. It's possible for us to bring a proposal to the UAC on how to sequester and use funds generated through any of these strategies, including the staff recommendation that we have tonight. And if that would be helpful, that would be something we could come back with.
Okay, I guess I'm not an expert in all this stuff. Could we use that money to fund let's help people with existing to electrify existing residences in Palo Alto.
Yeah, so.
Okay, can we use that, can we say a $37 million program over 10 years to help electrify existing households?
Yeah, I understand your question. I think the range of things that you know, if you want to devote these funds to carbon-reducing activities, the types of activities you'd be thinking about are electric vehicle charging, other ways to promote electric vehicles, building electrification. There may be some programs around demand response or flexible loads. Brett mentioned making sure that his water heater is running at low carbon times of day, and there are, you know, programs to promote that sort of thing that might be appropriate uses of these funds. So those are the sorts of programs that would reduce carbon.
Or purchasing energy storage for a grid.
Yes.
Well, I just, not a question, it's a comment, I guess. Just in thinking about this, and in the original kind of A, B, and C options, I guess are 1, 2, and 2A here. I have a lot of trouble with the 2A concept, where we would sell all of our surplus, all of our renewable resources surplus to the RPS requirement, because that sounds like we're doing the minimum to comply with RPS, and that just doesn't feel right to me. And that's not the way Palo Alto has approached this in the past. So I would personally rule that out. As between 1 and 2, the hourly accounting, but using bucket 1 RECs or bucket 3, I'm struggling to understand what the real difference is between the environmental qualities of bucket 1 and bucket 3. I like the additional savings, and I'd love to get comfortable with bucket 3. It would be very helpful to touch on what we were just talking about, to say this is what we're going to do with that money, as opposed to simply reducing rates. I mean, there's nothing wrong with keeping the rates down. That's good, but I would feel better about it if I was confident that savings was going to go into a program that would lead to further carbon neutrality of the community. So those are my thoughts, and I'm still interested in kind of thinking about bucket 1 and bucket 3.
And I think we could come back and frame a set of guidelines on how that set of savings could be used. That would be something we could come back to a future UAC meeting with.
I mean, in my own experience with this topic, which I find very complex, the first time I heard it about this whole thing about bucket 3 RECs, I ran screaming from the room saying, no, we should never do that. And over many conversations with Jim and Lena and Jonathan, I've been educated to think more deeply about this issue. I'm not an expert at it still, so I guess there's fundamentally how queasy do you feel, or how good do you feel about bucket 3 RECs? Okay, so I think that's a big, big question. And then the next question is, okay, let's just, if you can get to the point that you feel pretty good about the bucket 3 RECs, then I think, again, the positioning this as a major program about, a major green program that is getting funded by this thing, versus leading with, we're going to go do this thing, and then we're going to end up with this money. It's from a marketing and sales perspective, you sell the benefit. We're going to start a $37 million program to electrify and greenify Palo Alto, and we're going to pay for it this other way. That's to me, I would feel better about that than we're going to go do this accounting thing with RECs, and then there's going to be this money that shows up, and maybe we'll talk about what we're going to do about that later. I think that's a harder sell. And I understand why I personally initially had a very bad reaction to that. When I see members of the community, I think their initial letter was very much like of that kind of a reaction, which is like, heck no. So I think, but even in their amended letter, I think I felt like there was a path to being happier with this if they knew what the money was going to be for, and it was going to do something that they agreed that was a good thing.
All right. So we have,
If I may,
please.
this is just having a deja vu moment of our prior conversations, Jonathan. But I agree, how we sell this to Joe Public, City of Palo Alto citizen, is incredibly important. It is a substantial amount of money that can be used for the benefit of the community, either in the phrase, in the way of giving money back in the form of a rebate, or in terms of a program. Either way is successful. I personally would prefer that we put more programs in place, that we electrify California. That's just my own personal opinion. With respect to hourly accounting, I think generally, we've heard around the robin, I think there's general agreement that hourly accounting seems to be responsible. But I think there needs to be a caveat to that, and that caveat is if we're going to move to this, know where we're going to. And where we're going to is we're driving additional savings in our own surplus, and we're doing the fiscally responsible thing and capturing some of that money that is, quite frankly, ours, and we should put to use in our community.
You're not required to, yeah.
So I hate to admit this, but I need to confess that I on the alternative motions, number 1, hourly accounting without bucket 3 recs. My recollection from when we first started talking about hourly accounting was that it would show us to be browner than we thought, and that we would need to purchase some kind of recs to get back to being carbon neutral. So I don't understand how we save money by switching accounting systems and needing to buy recs to stay carbon neutral.
All right, well, let me try it this way. We have approximately $2.4 million in surplus to sell. If we
would be using banked recs to do this?
No.
Go ahead.
So I think what Chair Danaher was going to say is we have 10% of our supplies available to sell. It's surplus to our load. We can sell that. It's worth about $2.4 million in savings.
Are we just talking about the rec part of it, or are we talking about the energy part of it? I mean, we already sell the energy part of it.
Right, yeah, so this is just the rec value.
Okay.
So we sell those recs, and then we would have to, under the hourly accounting approach, we would have to purchase back some amount to cover our residual emissions. So if we purchase those with bucket 1 recs, then we have to pay $700,000 to cover those emissions. So that's how we get the $1.7 million in savings.
I think also one of the
So
things.
we're already implicitly, it's that we're switching from banking the excess recs to selling the excess recs.
Right.
Okay, this is the point you were making earlier about savings. Mm-hmm. So another choice we could make,
sales,
so true.
not savings, yeah.
Okay. I'll be back.
Well, I feel like I'm having a little bit of deja vu from the last time we talked about bucket 3 recs. But what I'm hearing is a little bit of a difference of opinion in terms of if the carbon savings are local versus if they're somewhere else, but it's the same amount of carbon savings. Is that what staff is pretty much agreed to, that whether it's bucket 1 or bucket 3, there's some equal amount of carbon savings, whether they occur in California or elsewhere?
I think that's our view, yes. That's not a universally accepted truth, I don't think, but that's our proposition.
And I think even more importantly, that the exchange of a California renewable energy credit for an out-of-state renewable energy credit is a wash when it comes to carbon. I think that when we talk about bucket 3 RECs, a lot of times the discussion is happening in the context of how do we make communities or agencies or utilities build more renewable energy. And to the extent they're buying these out-of-state, to the extent they have a compliance obligation that they're trying to meet at the lowest possible cost, and they're allowed to use out-of-state renewables that may already be existing on the ground, may be lower priced, it's not going to force them to go out and build more renewables. That doesn't necessarily apply to Palo Alto's situation. We've already done the work to get new renewable energy sources built in California. We're not looking to release those contracts. We're not looking to backtrack on that in any way. I think the discussion is about whether you take advantage of this short-term sales exchanges of in-state renewables for out-of-state renewables. We don't think that has a carbon impact, but we do agree that it has a public perception impact. And that's something we've been talking about for a while and we'll need to continue to talk about, I think.
So Jim, under the third proposal of selling down to the RPS, we'd be selling not just the RECs, but we'd selling the power as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, technically to sell a bucket 1 product and get the bucket 1 premium, the increase in price, you have to sell it as bundled with the energy and buy back an unbundled REC with market power, unspecified power.
Let's go back maybe to that pie chart that you have put up there. So what I hear is a lot of support for hourly accounting as being more honest, and at least there's people that everybody be comfortable if we had enough power to cover our load. Future discussion, maybe whether we sell off some of that and buy more bucket 3 RECs is in the third chart. But the first two options of either covering that extra cost from the hourly accounting, covering it with bucket 1 or bucket 3 RECs, either way, we show compliance. We show the carbon neutral chart in the middle. So it doesn't report our public accounting. Either way, we're ahead of the game from where we are now. The bucket 3 RECs have a net $100,000 cost to Palo Alto versus the $700,000 cost from the other. I suspect that going to the holier than thou hourly accounting methodology will have more support in council if we're covering that extra cost with bucket 3 RECs and still producing enough power to cover our whole load on the annual accounting basis. It's just how I look at that. I don't know if that point of view helps others. Separate discussion and more difficult and more controversial one of whether we sell down to the RPS level. And I've got an open mind on that, but that's how I look at it. Lisa, you were thinking about it more. Did you have more to add to your earlier comments?
Yes, So I think that among the many issues we've conflated a switch to hourly accounting with a decision to sell our excess RECs, whether it's annual or hourly. So acknowledging that, I think given the rich discussion here tonight, my instinct is to be conservative and move slowly. And, I thought Commissioner Jackson made a good point about bucket 3 versus bucket 1 recs and how it takes time and a lot of education to get to a place where you might feel like they are interchangeable. So I think where I'm landing is to potentially move option 1, hourly accounting without bucket 3 recs, knowing that we can always move farther in the future and try to be more aggressive. But I think that needs to be done hand in hand, again, as other commissioners have pointed out, with understanding exactly what the savings are going towards and what programs they can fund, and feeling like they have a strong carbon removing component that sort of justifies or explains the decision to switch to bucket 3 recs. And with option 1, hourly accounting, even though we don't go to bucket 3 recs, again, we get reporting on net CO2 emissions with hourly accounting, and hopefully can move forward and pursue hourly accounting for supply and demand resources as well.
I'd like to ask our council liaison if, Allison, if you want to add anything to the discussion.
Sure. Since this is going to go to finance, I think the way that we present the information will be important, and I've been using my time to make a new version of a chart and then also some icons, because having sat through most of these conversations last year and then this one tonight, I think what may happen at a council level is it will be hard to absorb the nuances of the information, and people might focus on the dollars. I know certainly that's something, we tend to, most of us tend to understand and go straight to. So I think some work with perhaps Megan Horrigan-Taylor, who's the Chief Communications Officer, and Assistant City Manager Monique Laconge-Henny, and this will help shape the conversation so it doesn't turn into a purely financial one. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Jonathan, this is on the agenda not for action but for discussion.
No.
Oh, you updated it? Okay.
The first agenda
All right.
had an error on it.
Looking at the old, okay. There seems to be support for going to recommend to council that we go to hourly methodology, and support that, at least for the time being, that we retain enough power to cover our load, and then sell the excess. And the question is, the amount represented by going to the hourly accounting, do we cover that carbon cost with bucket 1 or bucket 3 recs? We can present that to the Finance Committee and the Council as a choice, or we can make a recommendation for one or the other. Do we have, let me ask this from a show of hands, do we have consensus that commissioners support going the hourly methodology, right? And do we have consensus that for the time being, we don't want to dive into the deep end of the bucket 3 discussion and go down to the RPS standard? For the time being, we want to at least have enough power to cover our load.
What does that mean in terms of these alternatives?
Well, let me see.
These are a different one.
At least enough power to cover our load on the old annual accounting methodology, which is what gets reported on that pie chart.
Staying here and here and not going here.
Exactly. So the question is, do we sell 2.4 million of surplus and buy 100,000 of bucket 3 recs, or do we sell 1.7 million of surplus? That's really the choices there. and not use bucket 3 recs. I suspect the council might be easier to accept the hourly accounting if we were to recommend that column 3 that has sell 2.4 million and buy 100,000 of bucket 3 recs. But I may be wrong on that. We could present the choice.
Sorry, when you said column 3?
I'm sorry, well, column 3 meaning this one. It says item, there's actually 5 columns as you count it, but yeah, this one here, second from the right.
Column that's headed 2.
The column that's headed to, thank you. Thank you. Lauren?
No, I was just going to say, I think there is general consensus that hourly seems to be the smart way to go. And if for me personally, 1 or 2 is perfectly fine. And I tend to be a little more aggressive than my colleagues, so I would say option 2 and agree with staff recommendation.
Here, what's your preference?
I mean, I would certainly go with the hourly accounting. I think I would be inclined to say go to the column 1 for the bucket 1 recs for now. But if that works out, we can revisit going to bucket 3.
Column 2.
Okay.
Sorry.
This one or this one?
Columns versus alternate?
Yeah, so, yeah, this one or 2 on this chart is what we're looking at here.
Okay.
Option 1 or 2. This is no bucket 3 recs, that's bucket 3 recs.
No, I know which one is which, but I'm just forgetting what Commissioner Jackson said, because he said we're going with
Can
alternatives and he switched.
the commissioners use their microphones,
I
please?
did not.
So-
I was
Can the
switched.
commissioners use their,
What? Do you mind restating? Okay.
This column here, is that what you're saying? Bucket 3 recs for that extra?
So my understanding of the current conversation is we're looking at this chart and we're weighing in on 1 or 2, columns 1 or 2.
Numbers
Okay.
1 or 2, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, which is hard for me to map to the actual proposed things which I was looking at earlier. But given that, I'm going to leave that alone. Between 1 and 2, if that's what we're talking about, I vote for column 2. I'm more excited about column 2, that's what I'm saying.
So yes for bucket 3 recs?
Yes,
Okay.
for that differential.
Yep.
I mean, we were, column 3 does not appear to be on the table. I might be going there
Gotcha.
if it was.
Gotcha.
one of the things we can do if there's interest in column 2 is to come back next month with a list of guidelines for how those funds could be used, if that would help the discussion at all.
That would help me, for sure.
Let me continue. Lauren, maybe you next. What would you recommend at this point? Using this chart as the choices.
I would be comfortable recommending going with hourly accounting with bucket 3 recs.
Thank you.
I certainly want to go with hourly accounting.
And Lisa, do you have a preference between the 1 and the 2?
You know, like I said, I tend to be conservative only because I want the community to be on board for bucket 3. You know, in our prior conversations, I think I came around to that place. So I'm also, I sense that I'm in the minority. Like, I think that I'm okay with bucket 3 recs, but I actually think the next step is to just do hourly accounting without bucket 3 recs.
Yeah, and for the record, I'd be comfortable with that column 3, the bucket 3 recs for that marginal amount. I think we'd be ahead of where we are today, net gain, as it were. Jonathan, you have to know what the policy is going to be by springtime so you can complete the sales in a timely fashion this year. So if you can't wait and came back to us next month, is that going to give you enough time in the calendar to get a final decision out of council?
Yeah, I think we're comfortable with that. And as I've mentioned before, we will proceed regardless to sell any surplus above the 104.5% level regardless. So that 1.7 million, we will realize that.
So you'll
this
proceed
year.
under that
All that's
option
at question
one,
is
even
that
if we don't go to hourly
700,000.
counting, so.
And I think that waiting until next month will be enough time for us to come back. I think we can clean up and simplify the recommendation, try and make it as digestible as possible, get your feedback on how to make it even more digestible for the Finance Committee, and give you, I think, a better recommendation.
All right, so I take away there's a lot more clarity amongst the commissioners, so thank you both very much for that. And perhaps there will be uniform support for the bucket-free recs for that a marginal amount once we hear more about how that extra money might be put to use. Along those lines, we talked with, Lisa and I talked with Jonathan and Dean Monday. One of the things I'd like to see in the next month's report and agenda item is how are we doing with the charging program and putting in more chargers, because we have a lot of money available for that. Is it being deployed? Is it having results, and so forth? So as we talk about where and how can we use more money, well, that's a pot. Let's find out how we're using it. So with that discussion in mind, is there a motion to table this, action on this until the next meeting?
Sorry, do we want to table it, or do we want to read it?
No, the motion would be to table it and come back to it at the next meeting when they have reports on how the differential might be spent. AC indicated that would be helpful to his recommendation.
Well, certainly as to the distinction between using bucket 1 and bucket 3 recs, I'm fully on board on the hourly accounting and selling down to our 104%, whatever.
Yeah. Right, but I don't think we should make a recommendation to the council until we have the full package there. So all in favor then of
Sorry, so the straw poll we just took, where 2/3 of us wanted to do hourly with bucket 3 recs, we don't want to move that forward?
Jonathan's indicated there's time for him to come back to us with information on selling, and we can make a decision next month. So the question is the commission comfortable postponing action on the proposal to next month? All in favor? Hands up, I report unanimous on that. Good, so we'll move along. That is a complicated topic. Again, thank you very much, Jim, for helping explain it to us. And we will have a future agenda item on RPS standards and bucket 3 more generally on that. Several commissioner members, including myself, want to think more about that.
And when you come back, it'd be super helpful if the pros and the charts and the pie charts all use the same language.
Yes, good point, thank you.
And numbering system.
That's the cleanup I was referring to. We'll do
Yeah.
better with that next time.
Sorry about that.
All right. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, the year in review. Catherine, we were very long-winded, so I hope you can help us make up for that time.
Yes, that was a very important discussion, so time well spent. Thank you very much for working through that with all of us. Just a moment while I pull up the presentation from the screen. And just to, wrong presentation, let's see here. Nope, that's it. And just to reiterate, my name is Catherine Elvert. I'm the communications manager for the utilities department. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So the next two presentations we have for you come before you. I don't think you've ever seen anything of this sort, but we thought it might be something of interest. Each year, the city manager presents to the city council basically a recap of the major accomplishments and highlights and milestones that the city has achieved, and also a look forward to the year ahead and sort of mapping out our priorities and our goals and our plans. And we thought you might like to see this for the utilities department specifically, because we do a lot of work, and much of it is behind the scenes. So, many of you will recall that we spent a great deal of time on our University Avenue downtown construction project, which we dubbed Upgrade Downtown. We completed that and hosted a community appreciation event during the summer in 2019 to really send our thanks to the businesses and the residents and the visitors who were all impacted by this construction. And as construction projects go, this went pretty seamlessly. We are pleased to have this complete, and hopefully we won't have to be back for another 80 years. On the electric side, we had a pretty substantial project completion, which included the energizing of the Stanford Hospital, the expanded wing, as you may recall. We worked pretty successfully on the Development Services Center on a number of our customer connections. I do want to highlight the Stanford Hospital expansion because this did require a substantial, I'm talking about hundreds of hours of staff overtime in order to be able to complete this on time, a very dedicated team. The Colorado substation has been undergoing some pretty significant upgrades, including a new transformer. One of the 3 transformers was brought up, built in Colombia, South America, transported up here to Palo Alto. This was about a 2-year process, and replaced one of the old transformers. This happens about once every 50 years, so it's a pretty major accomplishment. This substation, as you may recall, feeds many of Palo Alto's substations and powers the community. On the wastewater, gas, and water division side, our engineering and operations team is very busy. I won't read all of the statistics, especially in the interest of time. If you're interested, we could follow up with you. But we're talking about thousands of work orders for repairing leaks, installing new customer service lines, reducing sanitary sewer overflows, flushing miles of sewer main, and really providing a very quick response time to all emergencies. Our field service representatives respond to thousands of service calls, and our water transmission group collects thousands of water samples each year to ensure that we have safe, reliable drinking water quality. And we also test our backflow prevention devices as well to ensure safety of our potable water supply. You, of course, will recall this historic water reuse agreement that we entered into with Valley Water and the City of Mountain View. We are very pleased about this, so thank you for your support. On the program side, for the first time, we conducted a survey of our customers to assess their awareness of and interest in distributed energy resources and energy efficiency. Of course, this seems to be at the forefront of customer minds. It certainly is for our utility, and it's no surprise the key takeaways were high customer interest in EVs, solar photovoltaics, and smart appliances. So this led us to launch a number of new programs to help meet those customer needs, including an EV technical assistance program, along with some incentives to help promote EV charging infrastructure at multifamily buildings for equality across all customer sectors. And we also added a consumer guide on the process for electric panel upgrades to accommodate customers who are considering buying an EV or electrifying their home. And we also looked at other in-home appliances that could take advantage of an electrification model, such as induction cooktop. We offered a loaner program this year so people could really get hands-on experience. And then we also engaged in a number of regional partnerships to help leverage economies of scale and our resources for rolling out products such as heat pump water heaters, offering rebates, and of course, engaging in group buy programs for solar and EVs, such as through SunShares. On the policy side, of course, our strategic plan has continued to be a guiding framework for us that we circle back to and use that sort of as a gut check for everything that we do here in our utility. Any program that we want to run, any resource we want to procure, any money we want to spend, what technology applications do we want to roll out, we want to make sure we're cycling this back up to the big picture. Does this align with our strategic framework? Does this align with our strategic goal? So this this has continued to be a guiding framework for staff. We check back, we provide regular updates, we report out on progress. We want to make sure that this is not a paper plan that sits on a shelf gathering dust. This is a living document. And of course, sustainability continues to be a priority for many Palo Altans. So we are working on updating our sustainability and climate action plan, making sure that our community sustainability goals will be achieved, and that those certain energy technologies will be accessible to all customers. And while this is increasing the penetration on the city's electric system, providing both risks and opportunities, we're going to make sure we're planning for these distributed resources to ensure we manage both the risks and take advantage of those opportunities. And then, as you will recall, we worked with our Development Services Center and other departments in the city to adopt an energy reach code this year, which is a pretty great milestone. We had a number of notable events, one of which was a successful open house at the Municipal Services Center. I want to thank our director, Dean Batchelor, for being a good sport at hopping in the dunk tank. It added an element of fun and camaraderie to the event. And also, some other notable events included a ribbon-cutting ceremony at HP for installing the largest solar project to date in Palo Alto. And we partnered with several other cities, energy providers, and environmental agencies across the Bay Area to host a home electrification expo. I think this was the first one ever to be offered. And as well, we hosted the 5th annual Great Race for Saving Water and Earth Day Festival in April at the Palo Alto Baylands. A variety of activities accompany that event. I hope you will join us this year on Saturday, April 25th. And we continue to host a number of EV ride-and drives as well as educational workshops so that people can really understand what that technology is so we can decarbonize the transportation sector. And of course, the Resiliency Workshop in partnership with you, the Commission, is really great for helping us to prioritize future projects and efforts to improve our community resilience. We strive for excellence, and we were honored with a number of awards in 2019, including from the American Public Power Association, the National Energy Innovator Award for our Home Efficiency Genie program. We now have added an electrification component to this award-winning program. Also from APPA, we were honored with the Smart Energy Provider designation. This is the first year the organization has ever offered this sort of an award, and this was specifically for recognizing us for implementing best practices in customer program design and the customer experience. Our canopy is very important in Palo Alto, and once again, we earned the Treeline USA Award, which recognizes us for, in partnership with the Public Works Department, quality tree care, worker training, tree planting and education, energy conservation programs, and Arbor Day celebrations. And then we have a long year roadmap for some of our critical enterprise systems, including advanced metering infrastructure, AMI, our enterprise resource planning, ERP, and we are beginning to replace or upgrade these systems with industry-leading applications to make sure we're adding new features for our external customers and internal staff. We have entered into the second phase of our AMI project, and we now have an RFP, a request for proposals, for selecting an AMI network vendor, MDM system, etc. And you will soon see launch of the new online utility customer account management service, the MyCPAU. You were invited to participate in the soft launch. Thank you very much for your participation and feedback. We hope to be rolling that out at the beginning of March. And a number of other technology applications were deployed in 2019, including some mobile workforce applications to improve the efficiencies for our field staff, to reduce paper forms, reduce data entry, and obtain real-time information in the field, really improving the efficiencies. So we think that it was a pretty successful year. We've got a great team. This is a picture of all of us at our all-hands meeting in July of 2019. Team effort.
Catherine, thank you very much. Any questions? All right.
I just wanted to know if there are any photos of the hula hooping at the upgrade downtown completion.
There sure are.
Oh, dear.
And I must compliment Councilmember Cormack.
I'm delighted to hear that they're not in the presentation.
I must compliment Councilmember Cormack for really showing me how to hula hoop and for having the bravery to be the first one to step up and pick up one of the hula hoops made out of PVC gas pipeline that we used in the Upgrade Downtown project.
Wonderful.
So, Chair, if you allow, I can go ahead and move on to the next presentation, looking forward in 2020.
Okay, if that's you as well, terrific.
Yes, I will go ahead and zip through this in the interest of time. All right, so to highlight some of our main priorities, some goals and plans, looking ahead. As I mentioned, we will be rolling out our new customer site, MyCPAU, hopefully at the beginning of March. Upon successful launch, we hope to see at least 50% of our utility customers sign up for the service in the first year, and we'd like to continue to see more customers sign on every year at the rate of about 10% of our customers. The call center is working on enhancing language interpretation options by implementing a video remote interpreting service over the next 6 months, and our aim is to improve communication with limited English proficient and deaf or hard of hearing customers. Also in the call center, an enhanced reporting software program will be in place by the end of the year to better serve our customers, reduce call wait times, and help us better manage and allocate staff resources. In 2020, we plan to begin phase 1 design of the city's fiber network, and this expansion will support advanced metering infrastructure, AMI, also our supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA, and internal wireless communication for public safety and city staff. Phase 2 implementation of the AMI and smart grid plan will begin, as I mentioned, including selection of an AMI network vendor and a number of meter data management systems, as well as meter replacements for those utilities. This involves completion of our currently ongoing citywide meter survey in preparation for the new AMI and our customer information systems. Also in conjunction with the IT department, we're going to be upgrading the city's SAP, Enterprise Resource Planning and Business Intelligence reporting systems. And then to enhance our exchange of information with customers, we will integrate new home energy and water reports with the MyCPAU service to provide customers with better insight into their utility consumption, along with ways to improve efficiency to save on utility costs. Eventually, with AMI, customers will be able to review their real-time utility consumption just with the click of a mouse. So some major policy items for our resource management division will involve an update to the Water Integrated Resource Plan. We're also going to be working on the next version of the Urban Water Management Plan, which is due in July of 2021, so much of the groundwork will happen in 2020. The Western Area Power Administration contract will be reviewed for renewal. The team will continue to evaluate our electric portfolio renewable portfolio standard options, much as what we talked about earlier in Jim's presentation. And then, of course, our sustainability and climate action plan will be updated this year, and it's timely. This year is the 50th anniversary of the very first Earth Day. Our focus will continue on building electrification, of course, EVs and water efficiency. And with the new energy reach code requirements, we're going to be looking at, we will be looked at serving as energy advisors for our customers. And we're going to need to continually look at the staffing and the other resources that will be required to facilitate those electrification desires and consider those factors as we develop our customer programs. And also these factors will be taken into consideration as we update our 10-year energy efficiency goals plan. And then regarding electrification, we of course will continue to evaluate the impact to both the gas and the electric utilities. Our wastewater cost of service analysis should be completed and coming to you soon. And then some notable new programs you may see will be a new small and medium business efficiency program, a non-residential workplace charging EV program, and possibly some new electrification programs depending upon the staffing. On the operations side, We will be engaging in a number of water main replacement projects along with the associated service laterals, customer connections, and fire hydrants to enhance safety, reliability, and quality in the Oak Creek, Leland Manor, and Garland neighborhoods. The Mayfield and Corte Madera reservoirs will be rehabilitated. And then on the gas distribution system, we will complete our replacement of approximately 100 ABS services. That's an abbreviation for a very long word, but basically that's an enhancement to our safety and reliability. Cross-bore, that, as you may recall, is the potential intersection of gas and sewer lines. That's a very important priority for us. That's safety is a #1 priority for us, so we're going to continue our cross-bore and gas and sewer lines safety inspections. On the wastewater collection system, we will finish replacing wastewater mains and associated service laterals and manholes in the Charleston Meadows neighborhood. And then we're launching a new citywide GIS system with our Esri platform, establishing synchronization between various databases and developing solutions for a number of utility applications. Customer service excellence, of course, is also a top priority for us. So on the electric side, they're focusing on putting in place some more contractors and consultants to help with our backlog of work. Of course, as it relates to electrification, there's going to be an increase in service orders and customers wanting to upgrade their panels, et cetera. There may be more transformer upgrades that are needed. We're going to be working on reducing those waiting times for those customer connections. The substation upgrades will continue with the final installation of the Colorado substation transformer. And then wildfire mitigation practices. Front of mind for many of us, we have some high-risk areas in Palo Alto, really just the foothills. We're going to be making sure we're working closely with our public safety and emergency response and public works departments to take mitigation measures to prevent risky wildfires. The underground rebuilds and distribution infrastructure replacements will continue. And then as it relates to succession and workplace retention, on the electric side in particular, we have a number of hard-to-fill positions. We have vacancies there, and so we are really throwing all the stops out to evaluate all our options for what we can do for recruitment and retention of those key positions such as line persons and system operators. So in January, staff attended the Northern California Power Agency's, NCPA's Strategic Issues Conference. And we like to do this to make sure that we keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening in Sacramento and at the federal administration level. In January, we also met with state legislators as part of NCPA and the California Municipal Utility Association, CMUA's Capital Day. That's important for us to make sure we are advocating on behalf of our public utility and making sure that our legislators know what is important to us and what the impacts of various bills will be. So we are following a new bill which would allow publicly owned utilities the ability to issue rate reduction bonds for infrastructure projects. This is a tool that is already provided to investor-owned utilities and public water agencies, but not yet publicly owned utilities. And then, of course, the strategic plan will continue to be a guiding beacon for us in everything that we do moving forward as we assess our priorities, our goals, and our plans in all of the main areas. So the main priority areas are workforce, collaboration, technology, finances, and resources. So in everything that we do, again, in our resource procurement, in our financial decisions, in our technological applications, in our recruitment and retention efforts to make sure that we have a vital workforce to carry out the tasks that need to be done to make this a safe and reliable utility, we're going to make sure we're cycling back to the strategic plan and what is our guiding vision. And community engagement through all of this is a very important element to us. We want to make sure that we are having these two-way conversations with our community members, with you, about what your priorities are so that we can work together as a team. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions or entertain discussion.
Any questions, discussion? All right, Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, been a busy year. Department did a great job, and a lot going on this year, so it's wonderful. Looking ahead brings us to the next agenda item, which are topics for future discussion. We have a rolling forecast, but it's time for commissioners to request other things.
I had two. One is, Jonathan, I don't know if you've gotten an OSHA report yet from Donatus Okamina's tragic, death, or when we expect
Yeah.
that, but it'd be,
I don't have an update on that.
Okay.
But I'll pass that on to Dean and have him reach out to you folks by email.
okay. And then the second one, I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but I'm wondering what staff does when it makes a change, and I'm sort of thinking about electrification, but I think it could apply to anything, with communications with the permitting side of things, because I've heard a couple stories recently of customers who are trying to do the right thing and trying to electrify and have just been incredibly frustrated. It's been time-consuming, frustrating, and expensive, where it seems to be a little bit of a moving target for them.
So we hear those stories too, and often they'll surface things that we need to sort out in the permitting process. So we talk regularly with development services and with our engineers about permit issues. I think sometimes the challenge is that there are a number of competing priorities and a limited staff, and so sometimes progress on permit streamlining can be a little bit slow. We've had successes. A couple of years back, we used to have problems with building inspections for heat pump water heaters, and we worked with the development services to develop a checklist that can be used for those heat pump water heater inspections. I think we're starting to have some similar problems. Some of the problems you're referring to, I think, are around panel upgrades, especially in underground districts, and that's an area, and energy storage systems as well, and those are areas that I think are ripe for improvement. So we're working on those topics. All
right. Lauren, thanks. Good questions. Others? Don.
I noticed that in April, there's a topic on UAC for the financial plans, rate proposals for electric and gas, which are then following up on going to City Council, I think, in May and June. And then I noticed on the to be scheduled at the bottom, there's this Phase 1B electric COSA results, heat pumps, EVs, rate fee changes. I'm just wondering, where does that fit into? I mean, so I don't even know what that topic is, but I think I'm generally been interested in, given that we are, for new homeowners, for new construction, we are now mandating, or soon to be mandating, electric only. And if we are trying to incentivize existing homeowners to rip out gas appliances and then pay more money, utility bills, because of higher electric bills, what's the thinking about in a electric-only rate plan?
It's something it's something we know is needed, and we would like to have it. We would have liked to have it sooner rather than later. We would have liked to have it at some point during the last year. One of the big challenges are the rate design limitations that we face around Prop 26. And so we've been trying a lot of different approaches to get that rate in place. Implementation in our billing system is also an issue, but those discussions are ongoing, and it's a priority for us.
Okay, and then something that's not on here at all, and I don't have a particular timeline on this, but you hear a lot of talk about AMI and AMR, and well, I guess I'm generally interested, and I don't know when the right time to think about this is how is that system actually going to work? And specifically, my understanding is it's radio-based between a residence and neighborhood receivers. Is it one way? Is it transmit from the customer? Is it two-way? We don't have to answer these questions. These are the questions I have. And then specifically, what are the security issues involved with the data transmissions from residences to these reporting hubs? I've read a lot of things on the internet about various deployed systems that have very poor security. I don't know if that's a universal problem or just the ones that I read. So at some point, when it's appropriate, I would be very interested in understanding what the plan is and what the technologies are and what the security implications of those things may be.
Okay, I'll add that to the list and talk with Dean about it.
I'm glad we're going to talk about a follow-up on the Resiliency Workshop. I've been looking forward to that, and that may trigger a desire to have a discussion about the second transmission line, which I see is on the list, but we don't have scheduled anywhere. But I think I'd like to hear what we're going to hear about the Resiliency Workshop first.
Others? Lisa?
Just a couple of things. I would love to have a better understanding of our outages profile. I feel like there have been a number of them in the new, maybe it's just because it was a goose and that was funny, and Mylar balloons. I don't know if our rate of our sort of average outage rates hold steady over the years or if they ebb and flow, but if it was, I see, there's a general educational update to be scheduled. I'd be interested in learning more about kind of what our outage patterns look like. And then I also wanted to say, I see tentatively for July, Oaxaca carbon offsets. That sounds awesome. I think that there is, just as there is deep suspicion of bucket 3 RECs, there is similar suspicion of carbon offsets. And it would be great to understand the ones that we've purchased a little bit better. So just wanted to express appreciation to see that item coming up.
All right, so I had a few things. Somewhere on this agenda in the next 4 or 5 months, we ought to return to the discussion of RPS and bucket 3 that we've postponed. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to get an update on the charging network status, what the achievements have been, how we're keeping track of our achievements, and what our goals are, how we're keeping track relative to those. What we're doing with this budget, the $9.4 million you mentioned, and also a little bit on who in the organization or what part of the organization is responsible for that, so we get visibility on that. I don't think 10 or 15 minutes is probably enough. On the resiliency, there were suggestions by one technical person from the community there about easy ways to do vehicle-to-home discharging if you have an EV. And it was mentioned, I think, a report on whether that's worth publicizing or putting on our website or otherwise, because there seemed to be, that's a resiliency step that people could take.
Can you repeat that? I was taking a note on your previous item.
In the Resiliency Workshop, there were, one of the engineers present was talking about easy ways for people to do, to use their EV as an energy source for their home in case of blackouts or the like. And I'm not enough of an engineer to have followed it well enough, but I'd like to make sure we don't lose track of that. I would like, and this in line with Don's comments, just to report this spring on reviewing the schedule for the AMI years ahead, because we covered it last year, but it's a good time to spend 10 minutes reviewing the schedule and maybe allowing time there for questions such as Don's on details about that, which were covered a year and a half ago, but this is getting closer. You weren't there, and it's a good time to review. It's going to be a major event for the utility. Those are my thoughts for now.
I had one follow-up on Commissioner Purcell's request for the discussion about the outages. One thing I would be very interested in at that discussion would be hearing about what percentage of outages that we're having would be prevented if the electrical lines were underground in those areas. Geese generally don't fly underground. Mylar balloons generally do not fly underground. So it would be interesting to break out outages as would they have been prevented if there was underground service in those districts.
You know, it was interesting, we had this discussion a little bit last year, and there was sort of a netting to this. How many would be prevented by putting them underground, and how many would be added due to burrowing creatures and roots, and so there's a net there. So we can come back with that.
That would be great. But as a citizen, I have not read about any squirrels burrowing into, I'm sure it's happened, but you don't read about it in the papers much.
All right, is there any more discussion? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All in favor? All right. Thank you. Jonathan, Catherine?